How you doing today, Mr. Jeff?
Doing well. Thank you, Chad. How about yourself?
All right, I'm good. We're here at Burn Rate and Beyond, talking about all kinds of stuff with respect to cash flow and business management. And today our topic is risk management strategies. So I guess let's just dive right in and see
Yeah.
what's going on. Um, so burn rate beyond usually is I always think about it as about cash flow and how you manage cash flow. That's what the burn rate. So with respect to today we're talking about risk management strategies. How does that relate to cash flow? Like why are we even talking about this? Or what is it?
Yeah.
Let's get started there. What is risk management strategies?
Yeah. And I mean, that's such a great question because I think it often gets overlooked, or at least not overlooked, but just really not thinking about it top of mind for, leadership of a business. But, risk are all around everybody and all the businesses. Expect the unexpected, things will happen. But, just it comes back to the whole adage of, if you don't monitor it, you can't manage it. So, but risk itself is all facets of the organization, I think. And there's, certain types of risks internal risks, external risks, and just identifying kind of where those lie and then trying to help mitigate that and put plans in place so that when unforeseen things happen, everyone knows what to do. So,
Interesting. So it's kind of a like a plan, right? Something bad happens. What do we do? Okay, that makes sense. I like that. I like that concept. And then obviously cash, like, I mean, does it matter? I mean, are all risks cash related, or is it more, you know, like
it,
only some are cash related? What does that mean? Like, why are we talking about cash here? So,
yeah. And it's such a good topic as well, and a great question because to me, I feel like it all revolves around cash, right? And I like to say these what ifs. What if this happens? What if that gets breached? What if this person, like leaves? Or it all comes down to the end of the day, it's cash. Some might be a larger cash burden on other, risk scenarios, but it does revolve around cash. So trying to mitigate or identify where those holes or areas might be, but also mitigate that too, so that if something does happen, it might not be big cash outflow because you're prepared for it.
okay. So like when you think about these risks, are there like a few concrete categories, or is it like what are the major risks that we're talking about here? Just to kind of get more concrete, so we're not just up in the clouds. There's these risks out there, you know. Oh boy.
Yeah. The risks can be, as kind of mentioned, like they're everywhere, right? There's a lot of risk everywhere. There's internal risk, right? There's like
But
just
it's like inherent in business, right? Like that's like,
oh yeah.
if you wanted to guarantee, like you go get a job and and then you just you get paid, and as long as you show up and work, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
So it is sort of inherent, right? Like I guess that's the challenge.
It is, and that's why I like to say expect the unexpected, right? Because something's going to happen, whether there's a power outage and the electricity to the place shuts down or something, or equipment fails and breaks in the middle of production, or a vendor might kind of that you rely on that makes your product who you are goes away. Like what happens, right? So there's just external risk, there's internal risks. There's even if you're in a production facility of some sort, but there's all sorts of um, let's say risks all around everybody. But so exposure, legal exposure, insurance. I mean, we can go on and on. And there's some big buckets that we can kind of talk about too. But their risks are all over the place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It totally does. It actually makes me think of I was just reviewing the audit risk equation recently. Just working out on accounting stuff here, and there's the concept of like there's the inherent risk in the business, and there is also when you're doing an audit, there's detection risk that if something goes wrong, it has to get detected, um, and then there's control risk, like are there internal controls that are going to can't be able to actually detect anything or detect and prevent anything from going wrong. But anyway, I feel like the big thing here that we're talking about is sort of inherent risk, I guess, right? Where it's like, okay, well, inherent in doing business, you have to rely on employees and or other vendors to produce whatever product or service that you're selling,
Hmm.
and so just inherent in that activity, you have to rely on them, and they might fail. Okay. So I guess let's see here. So there's a concept of like assessing these risks, and is this something that like should be done like every day? Should be done like once a year, once a decade? Like what's your there's like a pulse or rhythm, I think, behind this.
Yeah, especially folks and businesses that don't do any sort of risk management, starting off with identifying. And we can, talk a little bit more about, some ways on how to do it, but, for the most part, it's identifying the holes or the areas that there might be, risk exposure, right? Whether that is, you brought up internal controls, like who is signing checks or releasing payments, is it two people that need to get authorized? Is it, the vendors, and understanding kind of who you're dealing with in case something happens to them, does that really disrupt your product? So um, those are just a couple areas, but for me, I think even just establishing that type of process of identifying the risks, then number two, what is that process? And even just, I would, quarterly, I think is good, even twice a year. I mean, just understanding just where you're at. Some things might change during the year where you might need to put a little emphasis on that risk, and how do you help mitigate that? So it's not a set it and forget it. It's more of, let's just keep a pulse on it, keep an eye on it, just to make sure that, if something happens, that we're prepared for it.
You know what I just read today, just recently, that the IRS is doing away with paper checks. They're not going to accept any paper checks, so you can't write a check to the IRS anymore after September 30th, I think it is, of this year, and they won't send out paper check refunds anymore. And so that's like we do taxes, so I'm like, okay, that's going to change a bunch of inner workings of how we function, and it's not our fault. The government just, or Trump or whoever signed the thing, decided this is something new. Now we have to adjust. And I would say not call this a major risk to our operation, but it definitely is an influence that changes how we have to do things. So there's also that, like the government just like changes the rules, and now you have to adapt
Yeah.
because that's all there is to it, right? So good stuff. So I get the thing that you've mentioned before is something called a risk matrix, and
Mhm.
uh, and I guess what is that?
Yeah, a risk matrix is also a nice tool to use as you are kind of taking on that risk management in your business. But it's a tool. I actually have one if you wanted
Yeah,
to see.
let's do it.
It's a nice tool, and it helps identify the potential for risk. And this is where you can actually understand, say, all right, there is a risk wherever that is, and we can go through some examples. But you can kind of classify what that risk either is, how likely that something is going to happen, but then if something does happen, like what is the impact of that? So, are you able to see the screen, Jen?
Yeah, yeah, there's a
So
nice
this
colorful matrix.
yeah, who doesn't like good colors on a matrix? But the idea behind this is, kind of keeping it simple, but it's like it's a tool and a guide. So the way that this works is, once you identified an area that there is potential risk in the business, you can kind of do two things. What is the likelihood, and then the impact of it? So, um, for instance, if there is, call it one area of risk, and you might think that it could happen. It's possible, right? That it might happen. But if that does happen, where is it on this scale? Is it really insignificant, or is it might happen? There's a very low chance, but if it does, it could be very severe. So it would kind of be classified in this high bucket. So as you're going through
Hmm.
the different areas, right, and you can kind of go through everything, right? What's the the chances of lightning striking the building and things shut down for a week. Well, might be up here. It's rare. Or it might be it's rare, but it'd be pretty severe if you shut down. So you might get a
Hmm.
medium. But so you can kind of go through all of those. But when you start to get through almost certain and severe, then it's extreme. And those are some of the areas like that you really need to focus on to help mitigate some of those. So
Okay.
this, yeah,
Do you have some examples? Let's just walk through one real quick, just to kind of think through like what
sure.
it means.
Yeah, I put and how to use it, right? So I put
Yeah.
a couple of these together, but for instance, it's a cybersecurity breach, right? Especially in accounting software, not only just the business, but let's say specifically to the accounting software. And this is holding all, numbers. It might have payroll data in there, so it's a lot of sensitive information. So, cybersecurity is very big right now. So let's say that there is um, a, a a breach, right? Cybersecurity. The likelihood of it, it's possible, right? You might have some really good controls in place, but it is possible. But what's the impact? So if someone were to get into that system, the impact would be severe. So when you start looking at this matrix, you can say that the impact um, it would generate a risk rating of high, so that there is a possible
Hmm.
likelihood, and the impact would be severe. So it's a high rating. So once we've identified a potential risk and where this is on there, to me this is worth looking into because the severity of it is pretty high. That if something were to happen, so how do you mitigate that? So now it's like, okay, what are some ways that we can help mitigate that? So some examples might be the multi-factor authentication, allowing folks to really kind of vet people who are actually logging in the system,
Hmm.
provide regular security audits on, the system, and making sure that there are, the tools and protections, but even just staff training. That is huge too, just educating the people who are actually in there. Um, maybe they're not giving out their passwords or kind of locking their computer down. Those little things go a long way too. So that's just kind of one example of how to use a tool like this.
Yeah. So I guess it feels like I was reading through this and I'm like, okay, my interpretation of the cybersecurity breach for an accounting software would be major, not severe. Because when I hadn't thought about the fact there was like payroll data in there, I'm like, well, there's just a bunch of how much you pay your vendors and that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, so it's also up to it's a little bit subjective as to
Hmm.
how it works. But in the same, even if I said it was major and possible, it's still rated as high. But someone else who might think it's insignificant would the impact would be insignificant, would rate it as low, then maybe take no action, right? So I think that the color coding kind of helps you say, okay, well, if it's red, we probably need to do something about it,
Hmm.
and if it's not, then it kind of maybe we can reassess it later on. And I think that the beauty of writing this down also gives you it's just also like it could be like a for tracking purposes, like, oh, we thought about it, and did we actually do these things? Did we not do them, and how are we doing? So it's interesting. I like the visual and the idea that you can write it down and keep it and hold on to it. Um,
And it does help on top of that too. And there's definitely instances where even for, an E&O insurance or something, right? The errors and
mhm,
omissions, where sometimes a lot of the carriers might ask, do you have a plan in place? And if you say yes on it, but you actually don't, and something does happen, like they might not fulfill a claim. They might say, well, you told us that you had, some sort of plan or trainings in place, but you don't, so we're not going to pay that claim. And I've seen that in the language as well, that even just like you said, having a list of risks, which may not be important to you or to the next person, but at least you've identified it and you kind of keep a record of it, for sure.
yeah, there's definitely insurance companies love to find ways to not pay. The
Fine print.
yeah. Um, and I guess the question is, I see four tabs in your Excel spreadsheet here. Like, do you feel like you have a mantra or methodology of saying, okay, um, like these are like the 10 things that all businesses should go through to that the or the five or 20 or 1,000, like do you have a feeling about like what the major ones are, or do a list maybe?
Yeah, I did put a list together because it is such a good point. And a lot of people might not know where to start. So This is in no particular order, but I just
Ooh,
kind of list.
you gotta make this a little bit bigger. Can you zoom
Oh
in
yeah,
here?
yeah. Let's do.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. All right, there we go.
Awesome. Again, not in any particular order, but starting off with some big risks to kind of get the brains going. Every business might be a little different, but for the most part, I mean, number one is like a cash flow shortage, right? Everybody needs cash. It's the fuel for the business. It's just like gas in a car to make it go. But there's the inability to cover expenses. Like, what if that happens, right? What are the proper remedies or some sort of mitigation on that? Is cash flow forecasting, identifying, just keeping the pulse on that cash so that you can make the good decisions, and having some sort of reserve credit facility in place for any unforeseen events. But we
Right.
talked.
But that one also like makes me also think, um, but that's like a key part of like just projections too, right?
Hmm.
Because like there's this concept of like, okay, in the previous example, okay, we have the cybersecurity threat, or cybersecurity breach in the accounting software. Great. Okay, cool. So if that happens, how's that going to affect our cash? We're going to have to spend money
Hmm.
on dealing with it. We might have to pay out, pay a ticket. We have to pay a fine. We have to, deal with compliance. We have to, if it's ransomware, we might have to, either pay the ransom or completely redo the accounting software. All these things that could happen, and it's worth, for the ones that are more complex, doing a projection about how severe that would actually affect the cash, right? Because in any of these, be it a lack of usability because of like the cybersecurity ransomware or something like that, will affect operations, which will either impede the ability to collect cash because you
Hmm.
can't sell, or it will just cost money because you got to fix it
Yeah.
now that it's broken. So yeah, that the cash flow storage also made me think that there's a nuance of like building projections and mapping out what that looks like. Um,
Because that's such a, I mean, that was like, I think one of the first, questions was that it does revolve around cash, right? It's like, if these things happen and there are these holes and risks, somehow it all revolves around cash. And it
hmm,
could be outflows of cash. It could be not cash coming in, whether that's a customer leave and things like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's such a key point to all of this is minimizing the risk so that you're not spending extra cash that you don't need to. But
yeah,
yeah, some of these other items on the list, right? I mean, again, it's not that these are tools. It's more of, here are some risks that are some major risks too, right? We talked about cybersecurity threats, and there could be some regulatory compliance that may or may not affect your business, but not complying with them could have implications too. Even just working down this list, right? Customer concentration. You really have one or two big customers that if something happens to them, like, that's a big impact and blow to the business there that need to be aware of. But um, so these are
yeah.
some, I have 12, but all of them no, but these are some really good starting points for a business to kind of go through. Once it's done, you go through them, like, you have the list, and it's much easier to kind of update it and go through the exercise again now that you have it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's all over. It's around every business.
And there's the other one that I feel like you're just thinking about from a controller standpoint that I feel like I've seen way too many times is 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 that there's this key employee that the CEO or the founder trusts completely with the finances, and the controller is given too much power and ends up with a bad habit or a girlfriend or who knows what, and ends up embezzling a bunch of money. Like, it's one of these things that's like, it happens so much and it happens to really good people. It really it frustrates me, that there's not, the whole concept of like putting in internal controls, to mitigate that. People just don't even, sometimes don't even see it until it's too late. So
Hmm.
I feel like that whole like that's just one of these things that was, as you were, I'm looking through this list of talent retention and controls, made me think, oh, that's a huge one that I think is overlooked a lot of times with small businesses because it's all based on trust and the people you've worked with for a really long
Hmm.
time. So
And some of usually those folks that have been there a long time, and that's a big, a big, piece of that. And you mentioned they're given power, and oh, their so and so is not looking, and it's like they're not going to know, whether they take money or or even asset misappropriation of messing things and purposely on the finances that makes it look good, even though it's fraudulent, really. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways there, but that's a good
Do you
point.
have any favorite tools or technology that you like to leverage in this, or is this more just what you got spreadsheets and forms like what we've looked at so far?
Yeah, I mean, there are tools out there, even just technology, where I mean, sending a wire, even, right? I mean, it requires two. Maybe there's levels, only up to $500, 1,000, and then as the higher up you go, it might need additional approvers, just so there's no big chunks of outflows out there. But it's not like, hey, invest in this software and all of this is covered, right? But I think there's definitely tools out there that could be part of the business, but can help mitigate some of these, um, just as it is. But I mean, you look,
Yeah.
yeah, just I mean, you look at even a customer concentration, right? Just knowing your customer, that KYC, right? Know your customer, just
Mm.
who are you getting, who you bringing on board, how are they, how's their credit, things like that. You can take those little extra steps, and there might be softwares to help streamline that. Um, but yeah, there's
That's
just trying,
actually a
yeah.
really interesting one because I feel like there's that whole concept of credit that's really yeah, this happened to one of our customers recently, like maybe a couple of years ago, that they were really excited. They got into this new customer and spent a bunch of time on him. It was a big customer, and relatively speaking, and they got into him for like 90 days, and then just cut him off. We're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue just kind of went up in smoke because they brought on this new client, didn't really know him, and realized how, you know, once they stopped, the customer stopped paying, they realized, oh, these guys are kind of shady. It's not the first time they've done this, and so it's one of those things like how do you vet the customer and what is the process of can you do a credit check on them?
Mhm.
Some custom some of those tools are more useful than others, but yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, so to me, I feel like this whole thing is more process than software tools. It's like, okay, we have the discipline and the rhythm to just stop and think through and write down a plan so that we have it handy when and if it's ever needed.
Mhm.
So
Because even, I
yeah.
mean, if you really think about it too, it's look at COVID, right? I mean, no one really expected that. But now that we
Mm.
went through this global pandemic, should anything along those lines come around, I think people might be a little bit more prepared, right? And I remember sitting at a table with other CFOs, and we were part of this group, but this was right when it was kicking off, and it went from looking at cash projections to if revenue stopped today, what's our runway? Like, what do we have left? Like, how long can we last? Right. And that's a big risk. So, but just understanding like these what ifs of just being prepared is number one, instead of just like, I don't know what to do. And then something drastic could happen.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. I guess I feel like we've covered a bunch of stuff on this, and I feel like we are. I have a better. So I personally have a significantly better understanding of it now that we've kind of dug into it a little bit. I guess parting thoughts. I have a.
Yeah. It's, similar to, I think when we were talking about budgets, right? It's like starting one. If you don't have one, start one. So very similar to risk management. I think, number one is, understanding what those risks are in the business. And I would really emphasize like go through literally everything, even if you don't think it's a big risk. But once you start going through an exercise, you might uncover that there could have some big implications if something happens. So for me, it would be to just start this process and start to go through, because you could save a lot of money if something happens.
Yeah. So yeah, my closing question was just, what is the key activity that you need to do now mitigate risk in your business. What is the biggest risk that you haven't really thought about or developed a plan for? So anyway, that's my thought. Great talking with you again as always, Jeff. And we will catch up next week. Take care.
Thank you, guys.